basic, what was originally a trout fly today. This is a woolly worm. Actually, the very first fly that I ever tied many years ago. And this one definitely looks better than that first one did. But part of the reason that I'm doing this woolly worm is because I've got a series of videos that I'm going to do in the next 3 weeks on tying woolly buggers. There was a book that came out a number of years ago called Woolly Wisdom, and it is all about tying woolly buggers and woolly worms. And the book is by Carrie. I probably mispronounced that, but I'll have a link down in the description for you on that. Anyway, there's a lot of different ways that woolly buggers are tied. If you look at different videos, a lot of people just have their own way of doing it. Nice thing is that there's a part of that book where they talk about the originator of the woolly bugger and how he ties it. So I thought it would be kind of interesting to do a series on the woolly bugger and tying it the way it was originally tied up, and then showing some of the variations that other people do. So in looking and reading that book again and researching it a little bit, I thought it would be kind of interesting to do what is considered to be the predecessor of the woolly bugger, and that is the woolly worm. It's a very simple fly to tie. This is just some red yarn and black chenille Grizzly Hackle. I've seen these also tied instead of black in a yellow or an olive color, and often I've seen them tied without the red tail to it. There is a fly out there that is just like this, with the exception of, instead of the chenille, it's peacock pearl, called a red tag, but it is in all essence a woolly worm. So anyway, I just thought it would be interesting to tie up a woolly worm, kind of see where the woolly bugger, which is one of the most popular flies and well-known flies out there, how it got started. So that is the woolly worm, and I'll get started tying. Start the woolly worm with my hook and the vise. This is a Mustad 3906B in a size 8, I do believe, maybe size 6. A little bit bigger. You can tie these on down to about a 12. I wouldn't go much more than smaller than that, but I suppose you could. I'm going to go ahead and debarb the hook. And attach my thread. For thread, I'm using a Danville 6/0 in black. I'm going to advance my thread all the way down to just past the point, but not quite the end of the shank yet. As I mentioned, there's 3 materials in this. There is a red tail to it. I'm just using some red wool. I'm going to tie this in, and I am going to leave this the length of the body. I'm going to add a little bit of bulk for me. Keep advancing my thread down to the end of the shank, getting that tail wrapped in. And I'm just going to leave it long for now. Next is the hackle. I'm using, this is a whiting Grizzly hackle from a dry fly saddle. I want the barbs on this to be about the width of the gap of the hook, keeping in mind that when I have the yarn under here plus a little chenille on there, it's going to push that rachis of that feather away from the hook shank just a little bit. So therefore, when I palmer this in, those will stick down just a little bit past the point of the hook, or I should say the gap of the hook. Now, the original woolly worm was tied. Saddle hackles generally weren't these nice, even, uniform, dry fly saddle hackles. They were more like the strung saddles that you can purchase these days, meaning they had a taper to them. The original woolly worm had a taper to it. You would tie in the tip and the back, and then when you palmered it forward, the barbs would get longer and longer as you went forward, so there was a bit of a taper to it. But I like this version a little bit better, but just keep in mind that the original did have a little bit of a taper to it. Now for the body, I'm using a black chenille. This is a medium black chenille. I'm going to remove some of the fluff off the ends here so I can tie in the core. And now I'm going to advance my thread forward, collecting all of that down to the hook shank. You don't have to be concerned about keeping it really super smooth, because that chenille certainly is going to cover any of that up. I do want to be maybe an eye length, a little bit less than an eye length behind the eye of the hook, because when I tie all that in, I'm going to end up right up behind the eye of the hook there. Taking my hackle pliers, I'm going to grab that chenille and I'm going to twist it. This rayon chenille tends to get kind of flattened or even loose in the package. I find if I just give that a little bit of a twist and twist that up a little bit more, I'm going to get a rounder, that's the right term, fuller, more even body. I'll wrap that forward. I'm going to bring that up to pretty much right behind the eye of the hook. Secure that in and trim away the excess. I'm going to bring that back a little bit and try and get some of that wrapped down so it's not sticking out over the eye, where our hackle is going to get wrapped in. Now, if you've ever seen a woolly worm in nature, they're pretty bushy. So don't feel you have to scrimp on the number of wraps of this hackle on your woolly worm. I'll usually get about 6 or 7 in. Just going to open that up just a little bit. There's 4, 5. I might even get 8 in on this one. Bring it right up in here and tie that off. 2 wraps to secure it, and I'll trim away the excess hackle. Again, stroking that back, I want to just put in enough thread wraps to get any barbs out from sticking out in front, and then make a little bit of a head. And put in our whip finish. Trim away the thread. Now the tail, I'm going to trim this so the tail is maybe about half a shank length sticking out the back. This is just, if anything, it's probably more for you to see, but it's just a little attractor to it. Many people will tie woolly worms up and not even include this. Using my bodkin to just flare out and unravel the fibers so that it poofs out just a little bit more. Just trimming that a little bit to make it nice and even. And then a little head cement, and the woolly worm is done. You could use some different chenille if you've got something like a nice nylon chenille that's going to be a little rounder, that's going to look a little bit better. On a larger hook, say a size 4 or 2, maybe even use a mop chenille or something like that. It's just a fun, interesting pattern. Like I said, it's the first fly that I ever tied years ago. It was demonstrated for me when I was in college, and I remembered it very, very well. When I got into tying, I had the materials for it, so I just put one together. It wasn't quite as neat looking as this, but so that is a woolly worm. Look for the next 3 weeks, some videos on tying the woolly bugger. But this is the predecessor to the woolly buggers. And don't forget to check out that book, Woolly Wisdom. Thanks for watching today. Thanks for joining me at the Vise today. I hope you learned at least a new pattern, if not a new technique, maybe a tip or trick here and there. If you have any questions about this fly or any of the techniques used in constructing this pattern, please leave them in the comments section down below. If you go to the trouble to ask a question, I'll go to the trouble to answer it. If you'd like to help dressed irons, please share this video with your friends and anybody you think that might enjoy this pattern. Until next time, remember, it's fly tying. If you're not having fun, then you're doing it wrong.